All right. Hello, everyone. I am Hazan. I'm a professional game developer. I've been working in the industry for a few years now. And yeah, like you guys, I started by making my first game at a hackathon, right? So I am self-taught. I graduated with a degree in physics and computer science, and then got interested in game development. So I just, did a lot of research on YouTube mostly, so I didn't pay any money. Understood the difference between like different engines, which engine is best for me for the games that I want to make. I downloaded an engine, and then I was like, all right, how do I deal with this engine? YouTube tutorials, learned what I wanted, and then pushed through at a hackathon. And this is where I made my first game, and hopefully you guys too. So yeah, I was when I started working as a software developer, and then I made the shift into game development. And I previously worked at Ubisoft Montreal, and now I'm currently working at GameHive. Yeah, those are the games that I've worked on Unity at GameHive. So Unity is a game engine. I'll be going over that as we're talking, and I'll do like a whole intro to Unity and how to use it and how to use it to make your own game. So those are the games that I've worked on. They're both on App Store on the phone. So check them out if you want to. But Unity is a powerful game development tool, and you can use it to make whatever games you want. So this is the agenda for today. I'll go quickly over how to install Unity for those that don't have it yet. And then I'll go over how to create a Unity project. And then once you open Unity, what you're gonna look at, and gonna go over the layout, what you guys need to know about the whole project and how to make games. And then we'll design a game real quick, and I'll be like, okay, so this is the game I want to do. I want this, I want that. And then we're gonna make it together. All right. And so let's go download Unity. All you have to do to download it, if you guys didn't already, is just go to Google or any search engine and just type in download Unity. Right? And then first link, unity.com/download. And there you go. Just click on download for Windows. So this is not going to download Unity per se. It's going to download something called Unity Hub. So what Unity Hub is, it's basically a hub where it'll have all the different types of Unity versions. You guys come in, it's okay. So I'm just going over Unity. So again, Unity is just a game engine. A game engine is just basically a piece of software that is customizable for a specific purpose, right? In this case, the purpose is to make games. So there are many different game engines. There's Unreal Engine, which is more specialized toward AAA kind of games. There's Unity, which is more towards indie, small project or phone games kind of stuff. Then there's RPG, like RPG Game Maker. There's Rempi. There's a lot of different game engines. So definitely, you guys want to research which game engine is best for the game that you want to tackle. And the thing is, even if you're not going to end up using Unity, what you're going to learn here is still beneficial because it's much easier to. How many of you guys are programmers? So if you already know language, it's easy to learn another language, and that's much easier than from not knowing programming to knowing programming, right? So even if you don't end up using Unity, this is still going to be a really great talk for you guys. So once you download Unity Hub, this is what you're going to see. So here you're going to see for a projects tab, installs, learn, and community. Those are all the tabs on the left. Yeah, you can see my mouse clearly. Okay, so for the projects, if you guys don't have any projects yet, this should be empty. So don't worry about it. We're going to be creating our own project, and we're going to go through it all. The main important one is installs. This is where you're actually going to install a Unity editor. This is where you're going to install the engine itself that you're going to be using to make the game. Right. So again, the hub is just the hub that includes all your projects. It includes different links that you might need to learn stuff or resources. And the Unity editor is what you're actually going to be using to make games. So this should be empty again if you just downloaded the Unity Hub. And the way you install an editor is just click Install Editor and then choose whichever is there. You can choose any version, right? Like the differences between versions aren't really going to matter much, except if you're looking for a very specific kind of functionality that is in one version that isn't in another. Chances are you won't really require that. So just download any version. And then once you click install on a version, it'll give you different options like, do you want iOS support with it? Do you want Android support with it? Do you want to download an SDK? Right? So if you want to make a phone game, definitely download the iOS and Android support stuff with it. If you don't have an SDK yet, definitely download that. And yeah, once the downloads and installs are ready, we're going to start making our own project. So this tab is the Learn tab, right? Here, they're going to have a lot of different resources about like learning for free. There are a lot of tutorials online on Unity. There are a lot of tutorials on YouTube. So if you guys are ever lost and there are things that you don't really understand, there are a lot of mentors here who will be able to help you out. I'll be one of them too. So I'm going to be here the whole duration. Feel free to, if you see me, ask me any questions or ping me on the mentor dashboard. Otherwise, you can also go like search on YouTube, do your own research, go on Unity Learn and learn some stuff. The community here is going to have different resources, such as links to the blogs, the Unity Asset Store. So Unity Asset Store is just basically a store that has a lot of different stuff like different arts, tools, some code. So you definitely don't have to reinvent the wheel while working on everything. You can just head to the Unity Asset Store and start downloading characters, start downloading animations, and there are going to be a lot of stuff that are for free. There's going to be a lot of stuff that you have to pay for as well, but feel free to pay for it. It's fine. Whatever you download is going to be yours indefinitely. So it's not just on a project base, like you'll download something and it's yours. Feel free to use it on any other project. Right. So now that this all is done, let's start creating our own project. So first thing you'd want to do is you want to press on new project over here, and you're going to get a lot of different templates to choose from. Right. So there's going to be, when it's unloading, 2D template, 3D template, runner game, 3D mobile, 2D mobile, you know, so basically what a template is going to do is it's just going to download the libraries that you need. If you decided to make a 2D game, then you're like halfway through, you're like, wait a minute, I want to add 3D elements. It's fine. Everything that you can install here, you can also install inside of like the Unity editor mid-project as well. So don't feel like you've already committed to something and that's what you have to stick with. Not at all. Like we'll play around with everything and it's going to be okay. Right. So for me, I'm going to be making a 2D game. So I'll just click on 2D and then I'm going to choose where to save it. And I'm going to choose like what to name it. And then once that's done, just click on create project and it's going to create the project for you. Right. And this is going to take a while to open up. So in the meantime, I will just open up what Unity is going to look like once you open it. Right. So once you create a project, it's going to be empty for sure. And this is what's going to show up. Right. So I'm going to go over what this is real quick, just so you guys know what you're looking at. So obviously it's split up into different tabs or windows that you can, you know, play around with. You can modify, you can move however you want. I'm just going to keep things as they are for now. So let's start with the big thing in the center. This is the scene view. So what the scene view is basically, it's what the game is going to look like right here. This is where you're going to drag in your characters. This is where you're going to drag in the map, the obstacles, whatever. This square right here is what the camera can see. So whatever you create, you'd want to create within the bounds of the camera. And the game view over here at the top, this shows you what is currently in the scene view, right? And then once you have your characters in, once everything is ready, you click on the play button up here, and it starts the game for you, and it's going to automatically go to the game view, and then you're going to be able to control whatever you programmed or whatever's going to happen in the game. Right? Currently, we have nothing, so it's just empty. Right? On the left here is the hierarchy. This is basically what is currently in the scene. Right? Right now, we only have a camera. We don't have anything else. As soon as you open Unity in any project, you're always going to have a camera in there. So don't worry about it. And what a camera is a game object, and I'll go over what game objects are as we're going. Over here, this is the project tab. So this is where you're going to have all your scripts. This is where you're going to have, it's basically like your folders, right? You're going to have all the scripts in there. You're going to have all your art and assets in there. And this is where you're going to store all the data you're going to need to make the game. And then over here is the inspector. So the inspector is basically, once I click on an object, let's say the main camera, it just, in the inspector, it gives me all the data about the camera. It tells me the position, the rotation, scale, and then what I can change in the camera. So let's say in this game view, I don't like the blue color. I want it to be like more black or gray or whatever. I can play around with this. And it also had something called an audio listener, which is basically, it just listens to any audio. So if you play audio in the game, you need a source and you need a listener. Yeah, we'll be going over that later on. So at the top here, you're going to notice that there's something called a scene. So a scene is different from like the scene view, right? The scene view is just what the scene currently has. A scene is basically a small part of the game. And the game is composed of multiple scenes together, or maybe it's just all in one scene, however you want to do it. So think of a scene like you're going to have a main menu scene, and it's going to have a bunch of buttons. And then you click on a button like play, and then it takes you to the game scene where stuff happens. And then let's say you win or you lose, and you want to show another scene with like a hey, you won kind of thing. And so this might be another scene, or you can do it all in one scene. It's up to you. It's however you want to program. Yeah, any questions so far? Awesome. Okay, so the first thing I want to go over is what a game object is. A game object is basically the most fundamental, basic component of a video game. It's going to represent whatever you want it to represent. So a character is going to be a game object. A script manager is going to be a game object. Something that emits sound is going to be a game object. And game objects are basically everything in the game is composed of multiple different game objects interacting together. So the way you can create a game object is basically just right click, and then you can do whatever you create is going to be a game object. And so you can do 2D sprites like a square or a circle or whatever. So I'm going to create a square. And as you can see, a circle. Well, I don't know why I said square, but I'm going to create a circle. And as you can see, it's in the hierarchy, and it's over here as well. And yep, so this is a game object. And any game object is going to have a fundamental component called transform, right? So a transform is basically the most fundamental, basic component of anything, and it holds some information such as the position, rotation, the scale, and also what's the child of this game object, because you can nest game objects on top of each other, and the children of those, and then their transforms as well. So any game object that you create will always have a transform, right? Other components that you can add here are depends on the type of thing you want to do, right? So over here, this is just an image or a sprite. So it's going to have the sprite render, and it's also going to have the sprite property where you can change. So let's say I don't want it to be a circle anymore. I want it to be something else. You can click on this small circle on the right. I don't know if you can see it. But basically, once you click on it, it shows you all the different sprites that you guys have installed with Unity. They're still loading. That's why they still look like this. But yeah, let's say I want to change the color. I can change the color from over here, right? And I can add other different components as well. And while we're making our own game, we'll be adding different components, such as stuff that would render physics, different colliders, scripts, things like that, right? And then what else? So now this is in the game, or yeah, it's in the scenes. So when I go into the game view, it's right there. And yeah, feel free to modify it. So there are a lot of different hotkeys that you can use. So for example, if you click on W, it's to move the game object. So you can just, move it with the arrow here. And as you're moving it, you're going to notice that the transform position is changing as well. E is to rotate, but there's no reason to rotate a circle. Control Z to undo, obviously. R is to scale. So again, you can scale this way. You can, scale however you want. Again, whatever changes you do, they're going to be done over here as well in the transform. And they're all here as well. So T would give you this rec tool where you can, modify it however you want. Yep, so they're all here, but you can also have hotkeys, as you're getting more familiar with Unity, the hotkeys are going to be instinct to you guys, and you're going to be using it really quickly, right? So, yeah, any questions so far? Awesome, okay, good. So the next thing I want to talk are the different components out there, right? I'm going to briefly mention them now, and then as we're creating our own game and adding those components in, we're going to have a look at the different properties that they have, and we're going to be modifying them bit by bit. But yeah, so for a 2D game, the most fundamental component obviously is the sprite. The sprite is basically, or a sprite renderer, and the sprite renderer takes in a sprite, which is just an art thing, and it displays it however you want to. If you're going to have animations, it's going to be done in the sprite and renderer as well. Next, we're going to have something called a collider, and basically things don't have colliders on their own. You have to actually manually add the colliders on things you want to add them to. So there are multiple different kinds of colliders. There's a collider for every shape, right? So if I just search collider, as you can see, there's a box collider 2D, capsule collider 2D, circle collider 2D. And if you're making a 2D game, you'll want to stick with the 2D version of the collider, just because you don't want to like calculate unnecessary stuff with the 3D, like the Z-axis or things like that. And if you're doing a 3D game, then you definitely want to use the normal collider, not just the 2D one. So for here, I want to add a circle collider. So let me find that. There we go. And as you can see, the circle collider is basically this green circle that's added. And then I can, if you click on this button right here, you can edit the collider. So you can make it a bit bigger. You can make it a bit smaller. What exactly is a collider is basically something like a wall, right? It's something that when you collide with, something happens. In the wall's case, when you collide with it, you can't go through it, right? So this is just a basic collider. If you're creating a map where the character shouldn't go through walls, or they're like pillars or stuff in the middle of the map, or enemies that you don't want the player to be able to go through, then they're each going to have colliders. If the player can go through them, then they either won't have colliders, or they're going to have something called a trigger collider. So what is a trigger collider? It's basically same thing. You're going to create a collider, but you're going to enable the isTrigger component. So what the isTrigger does is basically it tells the player, okay, you can go through this component, but we're going to scream, hey, something happened. Like the player ran through this component, do with that info what you want to do, right? So for example, if you're playing a Mario game and there are coins that you want to collect in the map, the coins should have colliders, but they're going to be trigger colliders where the player can go through them and collect them. But somewhere in the code, it's going to say, hey, the player collected a coin. What do you want to do with this? Do you want to like increment the value? Do you want to like play a specific animation? Do whatever you want, right? So those are the two main colliders that are out there. So it's just normal collider and then a trigger collider, right? Any questions about colliders so far? Again, as we're creating our game, I'm going to go through it all again, and I'm going to use examples of when we're going to have trigger colliders, when we're not. Yeah.
So are they going to have like particles?
Are they going to have particles?
Are there going to be particles for some colliders?
So the question is, are there going to be particles for some colliders? That is up to you. It's however you want to program the game, right? So for example, there is also code where you can say if a player hits something that they can't go through, then you can also scream, hey, something happened here, you can do something. So you can add in the script, like we're going to be adding scripts later on, where you're going to say something like, if a player collects the coin, play this particle system thing. And if a player hits a wall, play this other particle system thing. So you're definitely in control of that. It's not going to happen innately. For particle systems specifically, I'm not going to be going over it in this talk. More because particle systems are like a big topic on their own, and I can spend like an hour and a half talking about them. Also, I'm not really the guy to talk about them. It's more like art related than it is programming related. But there are a lot of tutorials online that explain how to do particle systems. It's easy to make it like really basic ones, and it's easy to add it in the code and be like, when this thing happened, play this particle system. Yeah, sounds good. Awesome. So the next component that I'm going to be using is something called a rigid body. So what exactly is a rigid body? It's basically the component that tells the game that you want to animate some sort of physics, right? So if I want the character to move, so there are two ways to do it. I can either just move the transfer from here, like in the code, I'll just say move this on the side like that, or I'm going to have some sort of rigid body where I'm going to say, okay, in this rigid body, I want it to move. So the reason why you'd want to use rigid bodies is because, as I mentioned before, it simulates physics stuff. So if you want to add accelerations, if you want to modify the velocity, if you want information on like torque, impact, impulses, all those things, they're done with rigid bodies. If you don't add a rigid body, you're going to have to program those things yourself. So there's no reason to do that. And again, like for when we're creating our own game, we're going to be going over rigid bodies, so don't worry about it. But here you can see the different like components that a rigid body has. Again, there's going to be a rigid body 2D, and then there's going to be a normal rigid body. If you're making a 2D game, just use the rigid body 2D version. If you're using a 3D game, then have the 3D rigid body. And here you can, like, change the gravity, you can change the linear drag, you can change the mass. So if you have multiple objects colliding together, you can modify the mass of stuff from over here. You can have different constraints, and it basically constraints are like freeze X, freeze Y, or for like positions. So if I hit something and it stimulates physics, let's say I don't want it to move on the X, I just want it to stay as it is, I just want it to bounce. You do that here, where you'd apply physics, or like you'd apply it in code that it bounces, and then you'd press on the freeze X, right? And then freeze rotation, same thing. Mostly when we're doing 2D stuff, you'd want to freeze the Z rotation, because if I'm like, imagine me as a character and I'm walking, if I don't freeze the Z rotation, it'll like do a flip, right? Like I'll start flipping around in the game. I don't want to do that. I want to always stay upright. And if I'm going to flip, I'm going to want to play my own animations or things like that. But feel free to unfreeze it if you want some really wonky behavior. Maybe that's what your game's about. So do you. All right. Any questions so far? Yes.
What is sleep mode?
What is? Sleep mode. So like this one? Okay. Interesting question, actually. I'm not entirely sure. A lot of the different components that they're going to have, you're not really going to play around with a lot of stuff. Sleeping mode for the body. Yeah. You can search that. You want to keep it as start awake unless you really know what you're doing. So a lot of times, so in game dev, basically every error or every like thing you want to try to do, chances are someone did it out there and then they ask questions. So there are going to be a lot of different forums, a lot of different like stuff online that you can search. And let's say you want to do something and you search it, it'll say, okay, go into the rigid body and then change the sleep form to this. If you don't really do that, then chances are, or like if you haven't been put in that position, chances are you're not really going to know all the different properties about stuff, just because a lot of them you just want to keep it as the default value. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So let's start thinking about the game that we want to make. And I'm going to go over like, do a bit of design. And then once we do the design, I'll start coding it, right? And we're going to start making like the different scripts work. So let's say I want to make a 2D platformer, right? So we're going to have ground, we're going to have walls, and they're going to be at the bounds of the camera. And then I want to have different platforms that the player can jump on. Okay, and basically those platforms, obviously they're going to have colliders because the player can jump on. The player is also going to have a collider. They're also going to have a rigid body because he's going to be jumping around doing some sort of physics. Next, I want to have, let's say, coins, right, that the player can collect. And if they collect all the coins there are to collect, they win. Okay, but this game is really easy right now because there's nothing that was going to make them lose. So I'm also going to write I'm going to create meteors or something that's falling from the sky at random rates, at random speeds. And if one of them hits the player, they lose. And then I can make the game progressively harder. I can make it easier, however you want to make it. Sounds good? Okay. So first thing I want to do is I want to import the assets that I'm going to use. So if you're making a game, again, you can go online, you can check all the assets that are there, and then you can start like installing them. If you don't want to, you can create like sprites here. You can create circles, squares, and then let's say those are the bounds of the screen. So I'm going to press W to move it. So I'll move it down here, and then I'll press R to scale it, and I'll scale it like this, and boom, I have a ground. So if you click on an object and click on Control D, it's going to duplicate that object. Or if you right click, you can also do duplicate. So I'll just do Control D, and it'll give me this. I'll press E to rotate it. right? So I can just do that, right? And create my wall, my floor, my platforms. I can have a circle be my character. Feel free to do that. Otherwise, you can also just import your own art. So for me, I already have my own art ready, and all the assets that I'm going to use, they're also online in the hack pack. So feel free to download them from there and use them as well. So over here, I'm just the way to import stuff is very easy. Just click and drag the folder into the project, right? And it's going to import everything for you. Right. So while it's importing, let me just go over. Oh, it's already done. So I'm just going to go over what I currently have. So right now I have a background image. I have different music and sound effects for when the player, background music is always going to be on. Sound effects for when the player hits a coin or when they hit a meteor. And then I have a coin art, I have the meteor art, and then I have the platforms that I'm going to use. Right. So for the platforms, they can each be in their own art assets, or they can be in something like this, and I'll explain how to split it up, right? So now that we're here, they're all in Unity. So when I open this, as you can see, they're all here. The way you would add it into the game is simply click and drag. There you go. It's in our game. It automatically creates the game object for you here. And then let's say this isn't perfect. So I'm going to click on the rec tool, and I'm going to start modifying it so it fits the bounds of the game. And now when I go into the game view, this is what the game is going to see. Sounds good? All right. Now, will the background need a collider? Exactly. It won't need a collider, right? It's just a piece of art. Player doesn't really interact with it. If there's something that the player might want to interact with it, let's say they can interact with the spaceship, then what I can do is just add a collider around that spaceship and then say if something. So for example, what I do is I can just create an empty game object, right? And I'd call it spaceship collider, right? And then over here, I would add a collider, let's say a box collider, and then as you can see, it's right here, and that's not where I want it to be. So I'm going to move it over here. And then I can modify the colliders. And there you go. Now we have a collider around this specific thing. And if the player interacts with it, something happens, right? I don't really need to do that in my own game. But this is how you would do it in general. Okay. And next, you're going to have like all those different art assets that are imported. Just make sure that the texture type is going to be Sprite 2D and UI, because that's what we're going to be using it for. For the ones that are just single stuff, like those two, the sprite mode is just going to be single. And you'd also want to do alpha is transparency, right? So if you're not sure what that is, if I open this art right here, you're going to notice that, you know, it's like the background is actually transparent. If you don't like enable this, then it's basically just going to come with a background, right? For the platform, it's not going to be single. It's actually going to be multiple, because this isn't just one thing. Like if I click and drag this thing, I don't want it to drag everything in. I just want to drag like specific platform there, right? So what I do is I would change the sprite mode to multiple, right? And then at the bottom, click apply. If you don't click apply and then like forget and you move away, it's going to tell you, hey, wait a minute, there are changes here. So for example, if I change it back to single and then press on sprite editor, it'll say, hey, by the way, there's things that you didn't do, like you didn't finish. Do you want to continue working on that? And I'll just cancel here. Change it back to multiple. And then in the sprite editor, this will just open up the image and be like, okay, how do you want to do this, right? You can do it yourself. Or there's like an automation thing where if you just click on slice here, you can like slice it however you want, maybe by cell size, cell count, whatever. For me, I'm just going to do automatic. And what automatic does is basically it goes through it and then it sees, okay, this is an image over here and it's discontinued from the rest. Let's just separate this from the rest. And when I press on slice, there you go. You might not be able to see it. I'm not sure, but there are lines like borders around all the different platforms that are there. And then over here, when you click apply, now this is done. So now that we're back here, if I go over here, I click on this button right there, it'll show all the different sprites that are now separated from the main one. And I can just click on and drag them here as I would want, right? So now let's make a ground. So let me just drag this platform in. I like this to be the ground for some reason. So there are two ways to do it. I can either just take one and then expand it however I want. I think this might look ugly. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, have, oops, actually, instead of doing that, because they might not have the perfect Y, I'm just going to duplicate and then by Control D, press W to move, and then I'm going to move it right there. Control D, move it there. Control D, there. Right, don't worry about what's outside the camera view, won't really affect the game. So now when I go into the game, I have a ground, right? As you can see, it's very easy for the hierarchy on the left here to get messy. So in order to clean this up, which is why I'm saying like sometimes you want to have different layers, what I would do is just do create empty, and I will call this game object ground, right? And then I will select all of those and just put it into ground, right? So that way I can either move one on its own, or if I want to move them all, let's say I want to shift them all up, I can just take the ground parent object and then move it up, right? So this is the reason why you'd want to like nest specific game object. Yes, is that a question?
Can you show how to split up?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Can you show how to split up like the platforms?
Can I show how I split up the platform? Okay, sure. Right. So over here in this in the platform, once you click on this image, you're going to see that the sprite mode is either multiple or single, right? So you'd want to select multiple, right, and then go into the sprite editor. Okay. Once you're in the sprite editor, feel free to play around with this. By the way, like you can do like custom outline where you draw your own stuff. Do whatever you want. But I just did an automatic slice, so I'd go on slice here, and then I'd make sure that the type is automatic. The pivot is whatever you want it to be. So for me, I just want it to be the center, meaning I want the center of the object to be the pivot. Like if I move the object to position 0, 0, 0, then the center of the object is going to be placed at 0, 0, 0, right? If I make the pivot top left or top right, then if I do 0, 0, 0, the top left of the object is going to be at this position, right? And then once this is done, just click trim, right? Or slice and just slice, and it's going to slice it for you. Click apply, or if you don't like the way it's sliced, you can press revert and then do it yourself. So feel free to play around with this as well. Sounds good? Okay, any other questions? No. All right, so now I have the ground. However, if I leave them as they are, the player is just going to fall through them, right? They don't have any colliders set up. So there are two ways where I could do it. I could either add a collider component to each of those sprites and then like duplicate it, so I don't have to add one for each sprite. I can just create one and then duplicate that. Or I can just add a collider to the ground object, like the parent object. Let me just do that. So I'll just add a box collider here. Obviously, it's a bit out there, so I'm just gonna, modify it the way I want to. So I'll move it down here and then move it like this and like that. There we go. So now the ground has colliders, right? So if a player is like, once I install the player there, the player won't be able to go through the ground. For this collider, should it be a trigger or should it not be a trigger? No, it shouldn't be a trigger because I don't want the player to be able to go through them, right? So now we have the ground done. I want to do the walls. So let's say this is going to be the wall. I'll just add it here. And then for this one, I don't really care for some reason. I don't really care about expanding it. So I'll just do this, right? And then let's say this is the wall that I want, right? I'll move it so that it's over here on the camera view. And I want to duplicate it to the other side. But before I do that, I want to add a collider there. Yes, is that a question?
I'm just wondering, how did those platforms become individual sprites?
How did those platforms become individual parts? Okay. So did you understand how I split this up? Okay, so once you split this up, this is what you're supposed to see. And then all you have to do is just click on this arrow right here, and it's going to open up, like it's going to expand all the different sprites that are there. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So back to this. Let's say I don't want to keep it as platform 3. I want to rename it. So I'm going to rename it to left wall, right? And then I'm going to add a box collider on it. And since it's only one object, it's going to fit in pretty well. And then I'm just going to duplicate it and move the duplicate to the right. And I will rename this right wall. And again, it's already going to have its box collider, so no need to worry about it. Okay, and Control S to save. Sounds good? Any questions so far? Yes.
Sorry, but like for the ground, if we apply the physics to the ground folder, it will apply to everything within it.
If I apply a component to the ground, would it apply to the children? Yes. So if I have a collider that is surrounding the entire ground or the ground game object, then yeah, if the ground has a rigid body and it's affected by gravity, then the entire game object is going to fall, including the children, right? So be careful when you like nest things together. If you want some stuff to work on specific stuff, but not on the rest, play around with the code, make sure that you're modifying what you want to, and you're leaving the things that you want to stay as they are, like that. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
Could you quickly show how to make the collider for the ground again?
Can I quickly show how to make the collider
For the ground.
for the ground? Okay. So there are 2 ways to do it, right? Let's assume I'm starting from the beginning. Okay, over here, if I click on this checkbox right here, it just disables it. So I'm just going to disable it for now. So by the way, like all those checkboxes, you can enable and disable different components. So if you're playing around, you're testing, or if you want to disable something and then enable it in game, in the script and while coding, you can say just like enable this component and then disable it and things like that. If I'm creating the ground again, there are multiple ways to do it. I can either take one game object, put it in, add the collider to that object, right? And then once the collider is there, I can just duplicate it and I can duplicate it and then hit this. So now each of those has their own collider, right? In what I did previously, I didn't do that. So I duplicated it first over here. I duplicated it all first, and then I put them in the positions where I want to put them, right? So they're just, sprite renders or just images. And then I nested it inside an empty game object called ground. And on that ground game object, that's where I put the collider. Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you.
So this collider, like I modified it using the edit collider over here, just to take the shape of the ground that I wanted to take. Yes.
How do you separate like the ground from the original image? Sorry.
I'm sorry?
How did you separate the ground from the original image?
How did I separate the ground? Okay. So over here, did you understand what I was doing here or no?
No. I didn't manage to take the ground what's it called? Right from the platform.
Okay. So if you click on the original image, over here in sprite mode, does it say multiple or single?
Single.
Single. Okay. So first thing you'd want to do is change that to multiple, right? Because this isn't one just image that you're going to keep. It's multiple different stuff together. So once you change that to multiple, at the bottom here, just press apply. Okay. So now it knows that this is multiple things. It's not just one image. So once that's done, go to sprite renderer, sprite editor over here, this button, right? And it's going to pop up this window. And it's basically going to show you the entire image that you have. And it's going to ask you, okay, I know this is multiple images. How do you want to do this? Does that work? Do you want me to come over?
Yes, please.
Okay, of course. Oops. Okay. So over on, so click on platforms. You change it to multiple. Now click on sprite editor. There we go. So now you have this, right? So so you can either do that where you're going to do everything manually, right? Or you can just go on, just revert. Actually, can you maximize this so you can see all the different stuff right there? So just go over on slice, yeah, and then automatic, and then just press slice, right? So that is just going to automatically make stuff for you. Press apply. Okay, and now it's applied. So you can close the sprite editor, right? And in Unity, yeah, you'll see this small arrow over there, and it's going to have all the different sprites.
Thank you.
All right, no worries. Okay, all good so far? Okay. So now I have this going. I want to add different platforms. So I'm just going to add this platform over here. I think it's too thick, so I'm just going to, reduce its size a bit. Looks a bit weird, but that's fine. So that's going to be one platform. So now would be a good time to explain what a prefab is. Yes, question.
Yeah, my platforms are going behind my background.
Your platforms are
Going behind my background.
going behind the background. Okay, so yeah, when you're working with 2D, sometimes you want to put things in front of another. Some things you want to put things behind each other. So the value that decides the depth is the z-axis over here. So if you click on anything and then you change the z, it'll go back or forth. Let's say you're unsure how to visualize it, or you're working on a 3D game, right? What you'd want to do is over here, you see this blue highlighted 2D thing that I'm pointing at? If you click on this, it'll take you off of the 2D view, right? And then you can pan around, like you can move around and stuff. And here you'll see the camera. You'll see what the camera can see, and you'll also see how things work. So you can take the background, press W, move it way back there, right? And you'll see like it's increasing the z-axis. The closer you're getting it, it's reducing it. So just make sure the background has a high z-axis. And this is also how you can make like things appear closer. So you have a background, then you have like a line of trees or foliage or stuff, and then you have the path that the character is working on, and then you have bushes right in front of the camera. And that's how you can like do those things. It's by modifying the Z, and an easy way to like visualize it is by toggling it into and out of the 2D view, right? So if you move it back and then you go back to 2D view, you'll notice that like it didn't get smaller in a sense. Like the camera still sees the background as it is. Okay. Yes.
How'd you get the two blue lines to like here to go into 3D?
I'm sorry.
How'd you get the 3D?
How do I get the 3D view? So over here in this highlighted blue 2D, you see my cursor?
Oh,
Okay. All right, awesome. So now I have a specific platform on. It's a good time to explain what a prefab is. So let's say I have a specific game object that I created. I modified it. I added all the different components that I need. And then I want to make different copies of it in this scene and in other scenes. Does that mean that I have to keep on like doing the same changes over and over again? Not really. There's something called a prefab, which basically takes the game object that you modified and it saves it over here in the project so that you can just, go to another scene or whatever, then you click and you drag in the prefab as it is, and it'll already have all the components available. You can use it across projects as well. So if you have another like project running, but you want to use the characters from your first project, very easy, just go grab the prefabs from there, drag it into here, and it's done, right? And the way you do a prefab, so let's say, for example, I want to create a prefab of this platform. But first, let me add a collider there, just so that it has the collider ready. And now that it has a box collider, let's say I added like a bunch of different components, I add a bunch of different scripts. I'll just rename it. I'll call it, rename platform, right? So over here, I'm just going to create a folder just to stay, organized. I'll create a folder and I'll call it prefabs, right? I'll go into the prefabs folder and then click and drag. There you go. It just created a prefab, right? And now if I just want to do this, I'll just grab it, move it here, move here, and there you have it. It just creates different prefabs for you. Once they're in the game, let's say I want to start with a prefab but modify it a bit, modify this specific object, feel free to change whatever you want here. It's not really going to affect anything. Any changes that you make to the specific prefab, so if you click on the prefab asset here, anything that you change here is going to change in all of the assets that are currently in the project, right? So if I added in, if I want to create 100 different walls or 100 different obstacles, I create a prefab of one and I plug it in, and then I realize, well, I wanted to add another component to it. I don't have to visit all 100 and add that component in there separately. I can just go to the main prefab, add the component there, and it's automatically done to the rest, right? So for some reason, if I come here and I add, in the main platform, I add a rigid body 2D, for example, for some reason, then if I go to like all the different platforms, you'll see that the rigid body 2D is applied. And then if I go over here and I remove it, you'll notice that in the platforms, they're also removed as well, right? Any questions so far? Good, okay. So again, just for organization, let me create an empty game object. We'll call it platforms, right? And then I'll take all the different platforms and I'll move it in there by clicking and dragging. And then let me just move them the way I'd want to. Over here, over here, and then over here, for example. All right? All good so far? Okay, now, next thing I'd want to do is add the coins in there. All right, so if I go into the assets again, here are the coins. If I click and drag, oh, way too big. So I'll press R to scale, or I can just modify the scale here automatically. So I can just do 0.1 and 0.1. Still way too big. It's easier to just do this and modify the scale to what I want to modify it to. Let me move it here for whatever reason I want to. And yeah, so what are the components that I'm going to add to the coin? Anyone know? Yes?
The trigger event?
Sorry?
The trigger event?
A trigger collider. That's what you said? That's correct. I'm going to add a trigger collider. So I'm going to add a collider, and it's going to just be a circle collider, right? Because this is already a circle. Let's say I want it to be a bit bigger so that the character doesn't have to really hit it. It can hit really close to it. So I'll just make it slightly bigger. That's up to me. And then I will enable isTrigger. The reason why is because I want a player to be able to go through it, right? I'm also gonna, I'll just keep it at that for now. And as we're going, we're gonna go over the rest. Let's say I want to create a prefab of that as well, just because, I may want to use the same coin in other areas. So I'll just click the coin from here and drag it to here. And there you go. I have a prefab. And then I'll just move the coin wherever I want to move it. So I'll move one here, put one here. I'll put one here where the player will have to jump to get it. And then another one here, for example. Right? So the player will just want to go here, jump, 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 and then there you go. Right? Again, let me just, to keep everything organized, I'll create an empty game object, call it, oops, let me rename it. So I can either right click and do rename here, or I can just rename it from here directly, and I'll just call it coins, right? And then I will take all the different coins out there and I will move them under here. All good so far? Now, for the character, I don't really have any specific art for it. So what I'm just going to do is I will right click and add a capsule, right? So this is going to be my character, right? I'll make it a bit smaller. Let's say I don't like the color white. For some reason, it doesn't fit for the character. So over here in the sprite render, I will just change the color to whatever I want. Let's say I want it to be more bluish. Not the best with the background. Green. Okay, red fits well, right? So I'll just make it red, and then I will rename it to player. So what are the components I'm going to need to put on the player? First one is a collider. Should it be a capsule? Should it be, I'll just add a capsule collider 2D. Should it be a trigger or no?
No.
So it shouldn't be a trigger because I don't want it to be able to go through everything, right? I just want it to go, the things that the player can go through will be triggers already. So I still want the player to be able to hit walls and hit the platforms and I'll be able to go through them. Next thing I want to add is a rigid body. Why? Because it's going to simulate physics. It's going to add gravity. It's going to add, the linear drag, things like that. So before I add rigid body, for example, if I just move the player up a bit and then press play, right? So it'll take me to the play scene once it it imports all this stuff, it renders, and there you go, nothing's happening. But after I add the rigid body, 2D, right? And here you'll see that it has gravity scale. It already, it simulates gravity. So if I don't want it to simulate gravity, I'll just set the gravity scale to 0, and then it won't fall. And once you play, it's gonna fall on its own. Okay? So now for the fun part, programming. Who knows how to program here? A bunch of people, good. Okay, so to create a script, first I'm just gonna create a folder called scripts. Just for organization, you don't really need to do that. Then I'm gonna go in, and to create a script, I will just right click, create C# script. Any of you guys familiar with C#? Good. So C# is very easy. If you guys are familiar with Java or C or C++, jumping into C# is not going to be difficult at all. The first thing I want to write is the player script. Right? So I'll just name it player script, enter, and then double click. So this is just going to open the player script for me. While it's opening, I'm going to explain a few things for the script. Oh, it's going to open soon. It's pretty cool. So for the player, or actually for game development, so there is a fundamental difference between game development and other software stuff. And the difference is game development uses frames, right? If you're, when you're like 60 FPS or frames per second, those things. So once you're programming in Unity, you have to be careful of what you're doing only once in a game and what you're doing every frame, right? So once you write a script, it's automatically gonna implement something called mono behavior. Mono behavior is just a Unity thing that says this object can be affected by frames, right? And you're automatically going to have two different functions, one called start, one called update. So start is basically once you start the game or once this thing spawns, right? So if you start the game, the thing isn't there yet, start isn't going to be called. But once this thing spawns inside of the game, run whatever's inside the start function, right? Update is basically saying, okay, now that the start is done, every frame after that, what should the player do, right? So if I'm handling movement, right? If I'm handling, when I press a button and the player moves, I want to handle it over there, right? But for start, let's say, as soon as I start, I want to play a specific animation, I'm going to do that in the start function. Sounds good so far? Okay, so first thing I want to do is I want to control a movement. So we're going to be able to move on the X direction, right? So we're going to have some sort of movement speed over there. And then we're also going to have some sort of jumping force, right? So I'm going to have two public variables, and I'll explain why I'm making them public now, but I'm just going to do public float move speed equals 5f, right? And then I'm going to have a public float jump speed equals 5f. Where did I get the 5 from? I don't know. I'm just experimenting here, right? Later on, I might want to change that, increase it, decrease it, however the game feels. So if I go back to Unity, it's going to compile for a bit. Once the compiling is done, I'll show you why I made it public over here. Anyway, how are you guys? All good? I'll give you a heads up for something in the future. Not everything in Unity will have to deal with frames. So for example, if I write a function, right, and I say, like in some way I call this function to run, Unity is going to start and finish this function in the same frame, right, before it jumps to the next frame. And this is where sometimes you'll have like lags, where the game might freeze for a bit, is because there's a specific function that's being called that's running and stuff. So there are specific functions called coroutines, which I'm going to go over in a bit. And coroutines allow the game to do functions over over multiple frames. So you can say, run this part and then wait till the next frame, then run this part and wait till the next frame. So coroutines are a very powerful tool. And you're definitely going to be using it while making your game. And I'll go over an example in a bit. But yeah, once the player script is done, to add it, or like once Unity is done compiling, to add it, I'll just click and drag it over here. and it's added. So now you can see that the movement speed and the jump speed are over here in the inspector, and I can modify them however I want. Let's say 5 was too slow, I can just change it to 8, and boom, there you go. Now that when we're playing with the game, this is going to be the new speed, right? So this is why it's cool to have them as public, so that in the inspector you'll see them. If I create another private, if I said private float, whatever, it's not going to show up here, right? So this is just for you guys to be able to like modify things quickly on the go. So now that I have this, I want to be able to call the rigid body component, right? So there are 2 ways I can do it. I can either do public rigid body 2D, and I'll just call it RB for now, right? And save. And then over here, when it loads, I'll be able to, again, like there's going to be a rigid body field here that I can fill in. Oops, oh, there it is. And then if I want to fill it in, all I'm going to have to do is just click and drag the rigid body from here to here. And there you go. It already has a component there. Right? So this is the first way you can assign different components, and you can assign them across different things. So let's say I want to get a specific component from another game object somewhere else, but they're both in the scene. Just click from over there and drag it here, and that's how you can have different game objects discuss with each other. Another way to do it, so let's say you want this to be private for some reason, or you made it public, but you forgot to assign it, right? So what you can do in the start function, which is at the very beginning, you can say if RB is null, I can do RB equals get component. So what get component says is basically in this specific game object, get this component, and it is of type rigid body 2D. And because it's a function, it'll need open and close brackets. Oops. And there we go. Right? So I can just keep this as private, or I can keep it public and then have some sort of failsafe where if I forgot to add it in, the game doesn't crash. Right? So something else I want to go over is debugging. Let's say you have a bunch of different stuff. You're not sure like what's happening, or you're a bit lost, or something isn't working. You want to learn how to debug. The quickest way to do it is something called debug log, which is basically like a print statement. Right? So I'll just come over here and say debug.log. Rigid body, oops, is null, right? And just it takes a string, and then you could also add like, you know, it could do whatever a string does, right? So you can just do like rigid body or something like that. No, and here it's just going to print null. And over here I can say else, right? And then debug.log, rigid body not null, all good. Right? So now when I go in game, again, start is going to be called only once. So when I go in game, so where is it actually going to print? You know, your debug.log is going to print somewhere, but I'm not sure where exactly. It's going to print in the console right here. So in the same tab as the projects, you're going to have a console here. And over here, you can enable and disable like warnings, errors, the debug logs, things like that. So when I press play, over here, I suspect it to just print, rigid body is found, all is good. Right? And there it is. It printed once at the start, as soon as everything ran, it just says rigid body not null, all good. Okay? So this is a quick way to like learn how to debug. And yeah. Any questions? Okay, so on to the fun part. Movement. So the movement I want to implement in the update. Right? I want to say every frame, check if the player is pressing on whatever, and then do something. Right? So let me start by saying if input.get key. Right? So input.get key. So input is just a library and it has different functionalities. There are a few different, the ones that you'd want to use are get key down, and get key up. So what does those stand for? Get key basically means, is this button being pressed right now? If it's yes, do something. Get key down is basically, is this the first time, like I just press the button and then while I'm holding, it's just gonna trigger the first time I press it, right? It's not going to trigger for the rest. Get key up is when I release a key, right? So let's say you want to add some sort of charge, like charge jump or whatever. Then you'd say in get key down, start the charge, and then when get key up, release the charge, right? Or if you just want to say while it's happening, keep on moving. So I'm just going to use get key down. Get key for the movement, right? So it takes a specific like input, and the input is of type key code, and then just key code dot key code is just an enum, and then over here you can just type in like the letter that you want. For me, I'm just gonna say if it's A, then I wanna, oops, right? If it's A, I just wanna like move left, right? And if input dot get key code dot D, I wanna move right. Okay, so over here also you can just do or input dot get key code dot left arrow. Right. So I'm also saying if the player is pressing left arrow here, then move left. Over here I can also do the right. It's up to you guys. Right. And for the jump, it's going to be if input dot get key down. The reason why is because I want the player to jump. If I press spacebar, I'll do the jump on spacebar. If I press spacebar, I just want the player to jump once. While I'm holding, I don't want the player to just keep on jumping. All right. So get key down, key code dot space. Then I want to jump. Okay. Does that make sense? All good? So now, while implementing this, I'll want to change the rigid body. For example, there are multiple ways you can change it. Over here, I'm just going to change the rigid body velocity. So the velocity, are you guys familiar with what vector 2 are, vector 3? You guys know? Okay, so just a quick rundown. A point is just, it just has one value. So that's not working. Shame. Okay, so a vector 2 is just a vector with two values, like an x and a y. A vector 3 is just something with 3 values, like x, y, and z. Right? So a position of something in a 2D game is going to need a vector 2 position, which is just the x and the y. If it's 3D, it's x, y, and z. Same thing with the rigid body. So a velocity is going to need a velocity in the x direction, and then maybe a velocity in the y direction. If it's a 3D game and they're traveling diagonally, maybe a velocity in the x direction, in the z direction, right? So in my case, I'm going to need 2 values, one for horizontal and one for vertical. So I'm just going to do float x movement, right? And then I also want to do a float y movement, right? Oops, has to save. And over here, I'm just going to say, if we're pressing A or left arrow, I'll just do x movement equals minus move speed. And if we're pressing B, then I'm going to do x move equals move speed. Right, so going to the left is the negative value, going to the right is the positive value, and then over here, I'm just going to do rb.velocity, right? So as I mentioned before, the rigid body gives you access to the velocity, the acceleration, different stuff that you guys might need. So I'm just going to do rb.velocity equals new vector 2, and it's going to take the x move and the y move, which I didn't really implement just yet. Unassigned local variable. Oh, so I have to assign it. Let's just say 0f and oops, 0f. Right. So again, this is in the update because I wanted to keep checking. So now let's go back into the game. Let's see what happens if I try to move. Yep. Still compiling. Any questions so far? Does it all make sense? Yes.
Why do we say like 0?
So, so f is Float. Are you familiar with what a float is? So like different like int, double, float, things like that. You usually don't want to use double. You'd want to use float. So int, if you have like whole numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Float is if you want to have like decimal places as well. Okay. So now that I'm here, once I press play, I will be able to, or I should be able to at this point, move the character left and right. So, oops, okay, now it's moving, right? And it's rotating and it's doing a bit of wonky stuff because I didn't freeze the Z rotation. And this is why I was saying you usually want to freeze the Z rotation in the rigid body constraint. And if you want to do a game where the physics is a bit wonky, if you're thinking something like Octodad, maybe, then don't freeze the Z rotation. You want the game to go wild, right? So now when I'm just moving, there you go. It's not freeze. So when I press D, it moves right. When I press A, it moves left, right? And when I press spacebar, it doesn't do anything because I didn't implement the jump yet. Okay. So now, when do I want the player to jump? I want them to jump only if they're on a specific platform. Yes, question?
Compile this code and make the
Sorry, what's the question?
how to compile this code and make
How do I compile this code? So once you like save a script, when you go on Unity, it'll compile the script right away. If the script is attached to a player, then once you go into the play scene, it's going to start to move, right? So just make sure that the player has the script on it, and make sure that you press play so that you go into the play and you can start moving around. Does that make sense? Okay. So I want the player to only be able to jump if they're grounded, right? They're on a specific ground. There's like some sort of Boolean that says if they're grounded, don't like the player can jump. If they're not grounded, then the player can't jump, right? So I'll add a new private bool this time because I don't want it to be public. I don't want to modify any expector. And I'll say is grounded. And I'll start by saying is grounded is true. Like I'll assume at the beginning of the game, the player is grounded. And then over here in the input.get space, I'll do and is grounded. Then the y move equals jump speed. Okay. Now, this is going to compile. Is it going to give us what we want? No, for two reasons. First one is I don't have any condition where is grounded is false right now. It's just a Boolean. It's always set to true. I'm never changing it. How do I want to change it? I want to change it when it collides with a wall or the platform, right? So I want to say players on the platform, set is grounded to true. When the player is not on a platform, set it to false, right? First thing, I wanted to set it on the ground because starting the game where it's grounded, right? And then assume that the is grounded thing is working properly. If I press play and I start to play, what do you think is going to happen when I press spacebar? You would think, right, that if I press spacebar, it's going to jump. But if I actually press, it jumps very small amount and then it goes back down again, right? And even if I change, right, well, first of all, if I keep pressing space because I don't have the is grounded done, it's going to do this. But even if I modify like the jump speed, so if I go over here and modify the jump speed, right, it's not really changing the game, right? So what is actually going on? Let's think about it. And it's going to be a bit choppy. So let's say I press space and it starts to jump, right? So on frame 1, I press spacebar, it starts to jump. Frame 2, I'm either like I don't have my hand on the spacebar or the player isn't grounded anymore. So this condition isn't met. What happens to the Y move? It's set back to 0, right? So it's not doing the whole trajectory that I wanted to do. So what I actually want to set the Y move to, it shouldn't be 0. It should actually be rb.velocity.y. So that way, when I press jump, it jumps. And then when it's not grounded, or if I remove my hand completely, it's not set to 0 right away. It actually does the whole trajectory. because it doesn't reset to 0. It resets to the current y velocity, which is determined by the rigid body and like the gravity that you put in. So now when I press play, right, and I press spacebar, now you can see it's jumping. And then let's say it's not high enough. I'm just going to set it to 10. And then there we go. I can jump. And as you can see, because the coins have trigger colliders, I can go through them. And I can't go through the walls because they don't have trigger colliders. Right? Make sense? Okay. So I want to make sure that this is 10 as well. And yeah, we're running a bit short on time. Okay, so now that I got the movement done, next I want to, all good? Okay. So next I want to set the condition when the player isn't grounded anymore, right? So this is going to include some sort of collision interaction where I want to say when the player collides with the ground or a platform, then is grounded is true. And when they're not on a ground or a platform, is grounded is false. So Unity already has specific functions that allow you to use collisions right away. So they're called private void on collision enter. So as you can see, there's on collision enter, on collision exit, on collision stay. So on collision enter just basically says first frame where they hit, run this code. First frame when they're separated, run the on collision exit code, and then so long as they are stuck together, run the on collision stay code, right? So in my case, I want to do on collision enter 2D, and it's automatically going to take a collision 2D input, and basically this collision will have information about the rigid body, the velocities, and everything like that, right? So I want to say something like if player is touching a ground, is grounded equals true, right? So how do I code that? First thing I want to do is if I go back here, I want to be able to differentiate between the different game objects that I have in the scene, right? I want to say something like those things should be considered ground, this thing should be considered a coin, this thing should be considered a meteor, all the different things like that. So the way you can do that is by adding a specific tag to things, right? So over here under the name, you're going to see something called tag. So if I go to the ground and I select all of them and I just do, or actually, no, I just want to do it on the one that has the box collider. And then over here, I can add, like, I can take any of those tags, but I don't want to use those. I want to create my own. So I'll just do add tag and I'll create a new tag and I'll call it ground, right? And then I'll go back to this ground and I will now have the ground tag on it, right? And I'll do the same thing with the platforms. So I can do that with all the platforms, or I can just go to the platform prefab that I currently have, and I'll set the tag to ground, right? And then now over here, I'm just going to say if collision dot transform. So the first thing I want to do is get the transform of like the object that I hit, and I'm going to get the tag, right? Because the tag is what the like I'm going to use to differentiate stuff. I'm going to say tag equals ground. Right, then is grounded equals true. Right, now I want to do the same thing, or like the opposite actually, once I leave. So on collision exit 2D, I'm going to take this exact code, I'll paste it here, but I'll set it to false. Right, so now that when I play, does that make sense so far? If you're not sure if this is working or not, you can just add debug logs over there and just say, okay, did it actually hit? Is it not hitting? Is there a reason why those functions aren't being met? Things like that. Any questions so far? Okay, all good. Again, I will be, we're actually running short on time. I should finish in like 10 minutes. But I will be around the whole duration. So if you have any questions, or if you want me to go discuss coroutines with you guys, if I don't have time to go over it now, just hit me up and I will be there to help you guys through it, okay? Or if you want, after all the workshops are done, if you want to all re-meet here and you want to go over some stuff, I don't mind helping with that as well. So now if I press play, Also, I should have mentioned this, but in the hack pack, I will have links to different resources that you guys can follow, like different YouTube channels that I use, the Unity Learn tab. I'm also going to have a link to my workshop notes, which is basically everything that I'm doing here, plus a lot more, because I go a lot more in depth with the 2D stuff that I'm doing here. I'm going to be adding sounds. I'm going to be modifying UI. I'm also going to be going over 3D stuff over there as well. And you want to know what are like the different tools that you can use, if you go over to my workshop notes, the link is going to be in the hack pack. You're going to get all the information over there. And yeah, so now when I move, I can move now. And then when I jump, if I keep pressing spacebar, it doesn't jump again because it's not grounded. But now that it's grounded and I press spacebar again, it jumps. Over here, I can press spacebar. I can't press spacebar. Lands. I can press spacebar again. All right, all good? Now we got the movement going. I want to work on the coins, like the win condition. So how many coins do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm just going to go over here and I'm going to say private int max coins equals 5. I'm going to say private int current coins equals 0. Right? And then now, the same thing that I did with the collision, with the walls and the ground, I want to do it with the coins. However, since the coins are trigger, this time I don't want to actually use on collision enter. Instead, I want to use something called on trigger enter. And it's exactly the same as the collision. The only difference is in the collision, you're actually like simulating actual like collision physics, but in the trigger, you're not really doing simulating physics. It's just a trigger where the player can go through it. And over here, I want to do the same thing. I want to do if collision dot transform dot tag equals coin. I want to increment. So I want to do num coins. Oops, was it num coins or current coins plus plus, right? And then if current coins equals max coins, debug.log you win, right? Now, is this all I want to do? No, why not? Yes.
Well, if you pick up a coin, the coin will still stay there, and then you can just pick it up again.
Perfect. If I pick up a coin, the coin will just stay there. I can pick it up again. So what I also want to do is destroy, whoops, didn't mean to do caps, but destroy, got so excited I pressed caps accidentally. Destroy collision game object, right? So here I'm saying, once I hit the coin, check if I win, and if I win, print you win, and then destroy the game object. Now will this work if I go into game? So if I'm not sure, I'll press play and I'll play through it. We'll notice that when it happens, it's not actually going to work, right? And then you can add debug logs to figure out why. Yes.
I'm not sure. Did you add the coin tag to the coin tag?
Exactly. I didn't add the coin tag to the coin. So I can either go into all the different coins and add the coin tag here, or I can just do it in the prefab. Again, I'll want to create my own tag. I will call it coin. Then in the prefab itself, I'll just change this to coin. Make sure that, yep, it's all set. So now if I press play, right, I can move. Once I click a coin, the coin is destroyed. And then over here, I click another, collect third, the fourth, and fifth. Once I do this, all of those, over here in the console, it'll say you win, right? So potentially what I had wanted to, we have only 10 minutes left and there's another talk right after me. So unfortunately we did run out of time. What I did want to add as well is the meteor and have a meteor spawn. So the way I wanted to do it, I can actually try to like go over it really quickly just because it covers fundamental stuff, right? So zoom along this. If you can follow along, perfect. That means you understood everything really well. If not, because I'm going to be talking about new stuff as well, I'll be doing it really quickly. If not, feel free to hit me up afterwards and then we can go over it again. So first thing first, I'll drag a meteor in. I'll rotate it a bit because I want it to point down for now. And I'll make it a bit smaller as well. All right. And then I will add a circle collider. Right, and it's going to be a trigger because I want it to, when it hits the player, something happens. I want to modify the collider so that it's actually more just here. I also want to add a rigid body because it's going to be doing a bit of physics. Rigid body 2D. And again, with the rigid body, I'll want to freeze the Z rotation. Right? And then in the scripts, I'm just going to add a quick C# script called meteor script. Right, and I'm just gonna, I don't really need any of, oh, so in the update, I'll just say, so it's another way to move objects. You don't really have to use the rigid body. You can just do transform.position equals new vector 3, or instead, let me just do this. Are you guys familiar with like scalar versus vector multiplication? Okay, so I can just have a private float move speed equals -5. And then over here, I'll just say transform position times equals vector 3 dot down. Okay, since it's going down, I can just do this as positive. Or actually, no, it should be minus equals vector, or sorry, plus equals vector 3 dot down times move speed. Now, what this is going to do is basically every frame is going to move it down. So vector 3 dot down is just a vector that's like, sorry, vector 2 dot down, or it doesn't have vector 2. Okay, vector 3 dot down is just a vector that's 0, -1, 0. And I'm multiplying that by the movement speed, so it's actually going to be 0, -5, 0. But it's going to do that every frame, where I don't really want it to do that every frame. I want it to do it like once a second. So what I'm going to do is multiply it by time dot delta time. So time dot delta time is basically the speed at like the difference in time between each frame. So what I'm saying here is that every second, make it go down by the movement speed. Every second, not every frame. Does that make sense? Yeah. I know I'm kind of rushing through it, but yeah. So this is going to be in the update of the meteor script. I'll add that quickly to the prefab. So in the prefab, I can either click and drag the script in, or I can just add the component meteor script, and it's going to be here, right? So if I press play, it's going to start to fall. Yeah. Unfortunately, I did want to go over coroutines really quickly, but unfortunately, I did run out of time. So yeah, as you can see, it just it fell, right? And then in the player, I would add a tag over there, and then in the player, I would say, if it hits a meteor, print you lose, and I would also like have another script that says spawn a meteor at a random like X position at the top of the screen, and make it fall, and while it's falling, like spawn every 0.2 seconds or 0.3 seconds. And the way you program the 0.2, 0.3 seconds is using the coroutine that I mentioned before, where you can split things into multiple frames instead of just one. And yeah, and then how to spawn actually is a function called instantiate. Again, everything I'm talking about right now, there are multiple different tutorials about it online. I'm also going to be here, so if you guys have any questions about like how do I spawn, or how do I wait, or how do I do all those things, I'm going to be here to answer all your questions. Unfortunately, we did run out of time right now. So.